The morning sun cast long shadows across the immaculately manicured lawns of the Al-Rahman estate in Beverly Hills. Karim Al-Rahman stood at his bedroom window, his dark eyes scanning the grounds below with the calculated precision of a man who had built his fortune on attention to detail. At 45, he had everything money could buy, yet the sprawling mansion felt more like a museum than a home. Beautiful, pristine, and utterly lifeless. The sound of gardening shears caught his attention. Sarah Mitchell, his newly hired gardener, was pruning the prize roses with practiced ease. There was something about her that unsettled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, too refined for someone who spent their days tending to other people's gardens. Or maybe it was the fact that, unlike everyone else in his employ, she seemed completely unimpressed by his wealth. Karim adjusted his custom-made suit and made his way downstairs, his footsteps echoing through the marble hallway. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. A beautiful prison of his own making. His security chief, James Harrison, waited for him in his study with the daily reports. Mr. Al-Rahman, James nodded respectfully. The background check on Miss Mitchell came back clean. Perhaps too clean, if you ask me. Karim raised an eyebrow. Explain. It's just, everything fits perfectly. 20 years of gardening experience, excellent references, not a single gap in her employment history. In my experience, people's lives are usually messier than that. The observation aligned with Karim's own suspicions. He had built his empire by trusting his instincts, and right now they were screaming that something wasn't quite right. Keep watching her, he instructed, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had become second nature. And I want cameras installed everywhere. As James left to carry out his orders, Karim walked to the window. Sarah was now working on the herb garden, her movements graceful and purposeful. She had to be in her early 60s, though she carried herself with the energy of someone much younger. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and even from this distance, he could see the dedication with which she tended to each plant. The roses she had pruned were already looking healthier than they had in years. Whatever her secrets might be, she certainly knew her craft. But Karim hadn't become one of the wealthiest men in the world by taking things at face value. That evening, after Sarah had left for the day, Karim sat in his study, reviewing the security footage. He watched as she worked methodically through the gardens, stopping occasionally to make notes in a small notebook. Nothing suspicious, yet something about her presence nagged at him. His phone buzzed. A message from his mother, Amira, checking if he would attend the charity gala next week. He replied with a non-committal, perhaps, knowing full well he would find an excuse not to go. Social events had lost their appeal years ago, when he realized that people were more interested in his bank account than his company. Karim walked to his private safe room, where he kept his most valuable possessions. Among them were several gold bars, a reminder of his first successful investment. An idea began to form in his mind. If Sarah Mitchell was truly what she claimed to be, a simple test would prove it. The next morning, he purposefully left the safe room door slightly ajar, the gold bars visible from the hallway. The cameras were perfectly positioned to capture anyone who might be tempted by the display of wealth. It was a risk, certainly, but one that might finally give him the answers he sought. As he watched Sarah arrive for work through the security monitors, Karim felt an unexpected twinge of guilt. There was something almost maternal about the way she cared for his gardens, breathing life into the carefully curated but soulless landscape he had created. But he had learned long ago that trust had to be earned, and he had been betrayed too many times to take chances. Little did he know that the test he was setting up would lead to revelations that would shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. The truth that lay buried beneath the surface was far more valuable than any gold he possessed, and the journey to uncover it would change everything he thought he knew about family, trust, and the true meaning of wealth. By midday, Karim found himself unusually distracted. The quarterly reports from his international holdings lay untouched on his desk as he periodically checked the security feeds. Sarah worked with her usual diligence, showing no sign that she had even noticed the open safe room. Instead, she was completely absorbed in transplanting a row of lavender, her movements suggesting years of experience and genuine passion for her work. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, when Karim finally admitted to himself that perhaps his suspicions were unfounded. But something still didn't add up, and he was determined to find out what secrets Sarah Mitchell was hiding behind her peaceful exterior. The following week brought unseasonably warm weather to Beverly Hills. Sarah arrived earlier than usual, hoping to complete her tasks before the heat became unbearable. As she made her way through the garden, she paused occasionally to wipe the sweat from her brow, her experienced hands never faltering in their work. From his study, Karim watched the security feeds with growing frustration. For 5 days, he had left the safe room door open, and for 5 days, Sarah had walked past it without so much as a glance. If anything, she seemed more concerned with the wilting hydrangeas near the fountain than with the fortune in gold bars barely hidden from view. "Sir," James appeared at the door. "The additional background checks you requested have come back. Still nothing unusual except..." Karim turned sharp. "Except what?" "There's a gap in her records from about 40 years ago. It's small, just a few months, but it's there. Around the time she would have been in her early 20s. The information stirred something in Karim's memory, though he couldn't quite grasp what it was. He dismissed James and returned his attention to the monitors, watching as Sarah began working near the east wing of the mansion. She moved with purpose toward the rose garden, her favorite spot on the grounds. Something about her movement seemed different today. There was a heaviness to her steps that he hadn't noticed before. As she approached the rose bushes, she reached into her gardening bag and pulled out something that made Karim's heart skip a beat. It wasn't her usual tools, but a photograph, worn and faded with age. The security camera captured the moment perfectly, as Sarah's hands began to tremble. She sank onto the nearby stone bench, clutching the photo to her chest. For the first time since she had started working at the estate, her professional demeanor cracked, and tears began to stream down her face. Karim felt an unexpected surge of emotion, watching this private moment of vulnerability. Without thinking, he found himself walking through the mansion toward the garden. As he approached, he could hear her speaking softly to herself in what sounded like a prayer, or perhaps a conversation with someone long gone. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the photograph. "I should have tried harder to find you." Something in her voice made Karim stop in his tracks. It was familiar in a way that reached deep into his memories, stirring echoes of a past he had tried to forget. He found himself thinking of his own family history, the carefully curated version that Amira had shared with him over the years. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and tucked the photograph away as she heard his approach. But she wasn't quite fast enough. Karim caught a glimpse of the image, a young woman standing in front of a hospital, her arms cradling something he couldn't quite make out. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Is everything all right?" She straightened her back, professional mask firmly back in place. "Of course, Mr. Al-Rahman. The roses are coming along beautifully. The white ones should bloom any day now." But Karim wasn't looking at the roses. His eyes were fixed on Sarah's face, studying features that suddenly seemed hauntingly familiar. There was something about the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, details he had seen before, though he couldn't remember where. "That photograph," he began, careful to keep his voice neutral. "It seemed to upset you." Sarah's hands clutched her gardening tools a little tighter. "Just an old memory, sir. Nothing to worry about. Sometimes the past has a way of catching up with us when we least expect it." Her words carried a weight that seemed to hang in the air between them. Karim found himself wanting to ask more questions, but years of carefully maintained emotional distance held him back. Instead, he nodded and turned to leave, his mind racing with possibilities he wasn't ready to confront. Back in his study, Karim pulled up Sarah's employment file on his computer. The gap James had mentioned caught his attention. March to June 1982. Something about those dates tugged at his consciousness, a persistent whisper of significance he couldn't quite grasp. He opened his private safe and removed a small box he hadn't looked at in years. Inside was his own collection of photographs, carefully preserved memories of a past that sometimes felt like it belonged to someone else. As he sifted through them, his hands began to shake. There, at the bottom of the box, was a photograph he had almost forgotten existed. It showed the hospital where he was born, and standing in front of it was a young woman whose features matched those of the person he had just left in his garden. The date stamped on the back made his blood run cold. April 15th, 1982. The discovery of the matching photographs kept Karim awake long into the night. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore, yet his mind refused to accept the implications. He spent hours in his study, surrounded by old documents and family records, searching for answers that seemed to slip through his fingers like grains of sand. Morning found him still at his desk, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. The sound of Sarah arriving for work drew him to the window. She moved through the garden with her characteristic grace, but now he saw her with new eyes. Every gesture, every movement seemed to hold potential meaning. He picked up his phone to call Amira, his adoptive mother, then set it down again. The questions burning in his mind were too important for a casual conversation. Besides, there was something else he needed to do first. Making his way to the garden, Karim found Sarah tending to the herb garden she had started the previous month. The aromatic scents of rosemary and lavender filled the air, creating an atmosphere that seemed appropriate for the conversation he was about to initiate. "Miss Mitchell," he called out, his voice carefully controlled. "Might I have a moment of your time?" Sarah looked up, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "Of course, Mr. Al-Rahman." She removed her gardening gloves and gave him her full attention, though he noticed a slight tension in her shoulders. "Yesterday's photograph," he began, watching her reaction closely. "It was taken at St. Mary's Hospital, wasn't it?" The color drained from Sarah's face, but she maintained her composure. Yes, it was. How did you know?" "Because I have the same photograph." He withdrew the picture from his pocket, holding it out to her. "April 15th, 1982, the day I was born." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the photograph. Her eyes filled with tears as she traced the outline of the young woman standing in front of the hospital. Her younger self, captured in a moment of both joy and profound sorrow. "I never thought," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They told me you were gone. Your father's family, they said you didn't survive the delivery." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Karim processed her words. "What are you saying?" "I'm not your sister, Karim," Sarah said softly, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I'm your mother." The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of loss and longing. Karim staggered backward, his hand gripping the nearby garden wall for support. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his identity, began to crumble. "But Amira," he started. "Your father's sister," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite her tears. "They told me you didn't make it. And when I finally discovered the truth years later, they had already taken you out of the country. I've spent decades trying to find you, taking jobs in wealthy households, hoping that somehow, somewhere I would find my son." The garden, which had always been a place of order and control for Karim, suddenly seemed wild and overwhelming. The scent of roses and herbs became almost intoxicating as his mind struggled to process this new reality. "Why here?" he managed to ask. "Why now?" Sarah reached into her gardening bag and pulled out a warning note. "I've carried your birth certificate with me all these years. When I saw the job posting for this estate, I recognized your father's family name. I had to know, had to try one last time." Karim took the envelope with unsteady hands. Inside was a birth certificate, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. His name, his real birthday, and there, his mother's name, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. "All these weeks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you've been here, watching me, working in my garden. Every day was a gift," Sarah replied. "Just to see you, to know you grew up strong and successful. Even if I never found the courage to tell you the truth, it would have been enough." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the moment. James appeared around the corner, concern evident on his face. "Sir, is everything all right?" Karim straightened, years of practiced control helping him regain his composure. "Everything is fine, James. Please cancel my appointments for the day. Ms. Mitchell and I have much to discuss." As James retreated, Karim turned back to Sarah, to his mother. The morning sun illuminated her face, and for the first time, he allowed himself to see the resemblance. The same determined set of the jaw, the same expressive eyes that he saw every morning in the mirror. "There's a pavilion near the rose garden," he said softly. "Perhaps we could talk there." I need to understand everything." Sarah nodded, carefully tucking the photographs away. As they walked toward the pavilion, the garden around them seemed to hold its breath, witnessing a reunion 4 decades in the making. The pavilion had always been Karim's favorite spot for contemplation. its marble columns and comfortable seating, offering both luxury and privacy. Now sitting across from Sarah, his mother, he found himself studying her features with an intensity that made up for 40 years of lost time. "Start from the beginning," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "I need to know everything." Sarah clasped her hands in her lap, gathering her thoughts. "I was young, just 22, when I met your father, Hassan. He was studying in London, and I was working in my family's flower shop." A soft smile played across her face at the memory. "He would come in every Wednesday to buy fresh roses," said they reminded him of his home. The mention of his father's name sent a jolt through Karim. Hassan al-Rahman had passed away when Karim was just 5 years old, leaving him with only vague memories of a stern but caring man. "He fell in love," Sarah continued, "but his family was against our relationship. They had already arranged a marriage for him back home. When I discovered I was expecting you, Hassan wanted to defy his family to marry me. But then," she paused, collecting herself, "there were complications during the delivery. When I woke up, they told me you hadn't survived. Hassan's sister, Amira, was there. She handled everything while I was unconscious. By the time I discovered the truth months later, you and Hassan had disappeared." Karim's mind raced back to his earliest memories. "Amira always told me my mother had passed during childbirth, that she had raised me because there was no one else." "She raised you well," Sarah said softly. "I can see that. You've become a remarkable man." "But she lied," Karim replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "They all lied." Sarah reached across the table, hesitating before gently placing her hand over his. "Your father's family believed they were doing what was best. In their world, their culture, a marriage between Hassan and me would have been scandalous. They thought they were protecting both you and the family name." The touch of her hand sent waves of emotion through Karim. How many times in his life had he wondered about his mother? How many nights had he lain awake, imagining what she might have been like? "The gardens," he said suddenly. "Is that because of your family's flower shop?" Sarah's face lit up. "Yes. After I lost you, working with plants became my therapy, my connection to hope. Every garden I've tended over the years was a tribute to what I'd lost, a way of creating beauty from pain." The revelation cast new light on the transformation she had brought to his estate. What he had seen as simple landscaping had been an expression of love, a mother's dedication preserved in every bloom and leaf. "When I saw your name in the society pages years ago," Sarah continued, "I could hardly believe it. You looked so much like Hassan, but by then you were already a prominent figure, and I was just a gardener. I didn't know how to bridge that gap." Karim felt something crack inside him, the protective shell he had built around his emotions over years of isolation. "All these years I trusted no one, suspected everyone's motives, even you when you first arrived. I had cameras installed, left the safety open, all to test your honesty." To his surprise, Sarah laughed softly. "I noticed the cameras, and the open safe. I've worked for wealthy families long enough to recognize when I'm being tested. I just never expected that the man testing me would be my own son." The irony of the situation struck them both, and for the first time since the revelation, Karim felt his lips curve into a genuine smile. But there was still one question burning in his mind. "Why now?" he asked. "Why reveal the truth today?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "Yesterday was Hassan's birthday. Seeing you in the garden, so much like him, I couldn't bear the weight of the secret any longer. The photograph was of the last time I saw you both, the day at the hospital. I carry it with me always, but especially on days when the memory is the strongest." Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Karim's phone. Amira's name flashed on the screen. He stared at it for a long moment before silencing the call. "She'll have to know," Sarah said gently. "Whatever her reasons, she did raise you with love." Karim nodded slowly. "Yes, but not today. Today is for us. For 40 years of conversations we never had, for all the moments we missed." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pavilion, mother and son began the delicate process of building a relationship from scratch. Each shared story, each discovered similarity, was a thread weaving together a tapestry of connection that had been torn apart decades ago. The gardens around them seemed to respond to their reunion, the flowers appearing brighter, the air sweeter. In this sanctuary of green life that Sarah had cultivated, two hearts began the careful journey from strangers to family. The sun had long since set over Beverly Hills, but Karim's mansion blazed with light. In his study, he sat behind his massive desk, phone in hand, finger hovering over Amira's number. Across from him, Sarah waited quietly, her presence both comforting and surreal. "Perhaps I should go," she offered, rising from her chair. "This conversation with Amira, it should be private." "No," Karim said firmly, surprising himself with the speed of his response. "You've spent 40 years on the outside." "No more." The conviction in his voice made Sarah sink back into her chair, tears glistening in her eyes. With a deep breath, Karim pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before Amira's familiar voice answered. "Habibi, I've been trying to reach you all day." "Amira," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk. Can you come to the house now?" There must have been something in his tone that worried her because she didn't ask questions. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The waiting was excruciating. Sarah busied herself by straightening the already immaculate row of family photographs on the bookshelf, photographs that now told only half the story. Karim watched her, noting how she lingered over a picture of him as a child. "That was my first day of school," he said softly. "I was terrified." Sarah touched the frame gently. "You look so much like your father did at that age." He had the same serious expression. The sound of the front door opening interrupted their moment of connection. Amira's voice echoed through the hallway. "Karim, where are you?" "In the study," he called back, standing. Sarah moved to the corner of the room, partially hidden by the shadows of the tall bookshelves. Amira swept in, elegant as always in her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. At 65, she carried herself with the grace and authority of a queen. Her smile faltered when she saw Karim's expression. "What's wrong, Habibi? You look like you haven't slept." "Sit down, Amira," Karim said, gesturing to the chair. "There's something we need to discuss." She sat, her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap. "You're frightening me, Karim. Are you ill?" "No," he replied, then paused. "It's about my mother." Amira's face went completely still. "Your mother? But she didn't die in childbirth," Karim finished. "Did she, Amira?" The color drained from his aunt's face. Her eyes darted around the room, finally landing on Sarah's partially hidden figure. Recognition dawned in her expression, followed by something that looked like fear. "Sarah," she whispered, "after all these years." "Hello, Amira." Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Amira's hands began to shake. "How did you... Why are you..." "She's my gardener," Karim said, his voice hard. "Has been for weeks now. But you knew that, didn't you? When you recommended her agency to me last month." A sob escaped Amira's throat. "Yes," she admitted. "I've kept track of her over the years. When I heard she was working in Beverly Hills, I thought perhaps it was time." "Time?" Karim's voice rose. "You've had 40 years. 40 years of lies, of watching me wonder about my mother, of seeing me build walls around myself because I thought I had been abandoned." "Please," Amira reached for him. "You must understand. The family, your grandfather, they would have cut Hassan off completely. You would have grown up with nothing. Instead, I grew up with everything except the truth," Karim replied bitterly. "And what about Sarah? What gave you the right to tell her that her child had died?" Amira turned to Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "I convinced myself it was merciful. That a clean break would be easier than a lifetime of being excluded, of watching your child grow up in a world you couldn't be part of. That wasn't your decision to make," Sarah said quietly. "You took away our chance to be a family." The weight of 40 years of deception hung heavy in the air. Karim paced the room, his emotions threatening to overflow. "All these years, you've been the only mother I've known. I loved you, still love you, but how can I trust you after this?" "Everything I did was out of love," Amira pleaded. "Hassan was my brother. When he died, raising you became my whole world. I wanted to tell you the truth so many times, but I was afraid. Afraid you would hate me, afraid of losing you." Sarah moved forward, placing herself between mother and son. "The past can't be changed," she said softly. "But perhaps we can build something new from here, something honest." Karim looked at the two women who had shaped his life, one through her presence, the other through her absence. The anger that had fueled him moments ago began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "I need time," he said finally. "Time to process all of this, But no more lies, Amira. No more secrets. Amira nodded, dabbing at her tears with a silk handkerchief. I'll tell you everything. About Hassan, about those early years, about why the family made the choices they did. When you're ready to hear it. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the suddenly quiet house. 3 people stood in the study, each lost in their own thoughts, each wondering how this night would change their future. The next few days passed in a blur of emotional conversations and quiet revelations. Karim had insisted that Sarah stop working as his gardener immediately, though she still spent every day in the mansion. Now, instead of tending to plants, she was tending to the delicate shoots of their growing relationship. One morning, Karim found her in the kitchen, teaching his chef how to make the English breakfast she used to cook for his father. The sight stopped him in his tracks. This simple domestic scene represented everything he had missed growing up. Your father loved these breakfasts, Sarah said, noticing him in the doorway. He said they reminded him of his student days in London. Karim joined her at the kitchen island, watching as she expertly flipped bacon. Tell me more about him. About how you met. Sarah's face softened with memory. He would come to the flower shop every Wednesday, precisely at 4 o'clock. Always roses, always red. One day, it was raining terribly, and I insisted he wait out the storm. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He missed his next class, but he said it was worth it. The chef quietly excused himself, leaving mother and son alone. Karim found himself hungry for these stories, these glimpses into a past he never knew he had. What happened after they took me? He asked softly. Sarah's hands stilled on the cooking utensils. I searched everywhere. Went to the embassy, hired private investigators, but your grandfather's influence was too strong. When Hassan died, I thought I'd lost my last connection to you. Amira told me more about those early years, Karim said, about how grandfather threatened to disown the entire family if she didn't help separate us. She was young too, Sarah acknowledged, caught between family loyalty and what she knew was right. I've spent years being angry with her, but now I see how much she loves you, how well she raised you. It doesn't excuse what she did, but perhaps it helps explain it. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Amira herself. She had been coming by every day, trying to rebuild the trust she had broken. Today she carried a large box. I found these in storage, she said hesitantly. I thought perhaps you both would like to see them. Inside the box were photographs, letters, and documents, a paper trail of truth that had been hidden for 4 decades. There were pictures of Hassan and Sarah in London, looking young and in love. Letters Hassan had written to his family about Sarah, full of hope and determination. Even the original birth certificate, listing both parents' names. I kept everything, Amira admitted. I couldn't bear to destroy them, even when father demanded I do so. Karim and Sarah spent the morning going through the box, with Amira quietly filling in details. Each photograph, each letter, was a piece of their shared history coming back into focus. Your father would be proud of you, Sarah said, touching a photo of Hassan holding baby Karim, of the man you've become. Despite my trust issues and tendency to install surveillance cameras, Karim asked wryly. Both women laughed, and the sound seemed to lift some of the heaviness from the room. It wasn't perfect, this newfound family dynamic, but it was real, and it was theirs. Later that afternoon, Karim found Sarah in her beloved garden, examining the roses she had so carefully tended. He joined her, appreciating how the setting sun painted everything in soft gold. I've been thinking, he said, this house, it's too big for one person. And since you're no longer my employee? Sarah looked at him questioningly. Stay, he said simply. Both of you. There's more than enough room, and perhaps it's time this place felt like a real home. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. Are you sure? The East Wing has the best views of the garden, he continued, and Amira's suite in the West Wing is already set up. Unless, would it be too difficult living with her? Sarah looked thoughtful. 40 years is a long time to hold on to anger. And she did give me back my son, even if it took longer than it should have. From the terrace, they could see Amira watching them, her expression hopeful. Sarah waved her down, and soon all 3 of them were standing among the roses that had brought them back together. The garden needs a lot of work, Sarah said, looking around critically. The hydrangeas are still struggling. Good thing you're no longer just the gardener, Karim smiled. Now you can supervise a whole team of them. As the sun set over Beverly Hills, 3 people who had been separated by lies found themselves united by truth. The garden that had been Sarah's sanctuary, Karim's test, and Amira's backdrop to 40 years of guilt was transformed into something else. A symbol of growth, healing, and second chances. The transition from solitude to family life wasn't as seamless as Karim had imagined. After years of rigid routines and carefully maintained distance, he found himself navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. The mansion, once a monument to his isolation, was slowly transforming into something warmer, more chaotic, and infinitely more alive. Sarah had taken charge of redecorating the East Wing, though she insisted on keeping her modifications modest. "Just because I'm no longer the gardener doesn't mean I need to live like a queen," she'd said when Karim suggested more elaborate furnishings. Instead, she filled her spaces with plants, books, and comfortable furniture that reflected her practical nature. One morning, Karim woke to the sound of laughter floating up from the kitchen, a sound so foreign in his usually quiet home that it drew him downstairs while still in his room. He found Sarah and Amira working side by side, preparing breakfast as if they'd been doing it together for years. "Good morning, Habibi," Amira called out, whisking eggs in a bowl. "Sarah is teaching me how to make a proper English breakfast, though I still say our traditional breakfast is better." "They're different, not better or worse," Sarah corrected gently, flipping pieces of toast. "Just like families." The metaphor wasn't lost on any of them. Karim watched as the 2 women moved around each other in the kitchen, their initial awkwardness replaced by a careful courtesy that was slowly blooming into genuine warmth. It was a small miracle, he thought, how forgiveness could transform old wounds into new beginnings. The garden committee called again, Amira mentioned, setting plates on the kitchen island. "They're quite insistent about featuring our gardens in their annual tour." "Our gardens?" Karim raised an eyebrow. "Well, they're hardly just yours anymore, are they?" Sarah smiled, placing a perfectly cooked breakfast in front of him. "Though I've been meaning to discuss some ideas for the West Terrace. The space has so much potential. Whatever you think is best," Karim found himself saying, realizing he meant it. Surrendering control, he was discovering, could be its own kind of freedom. Later that day, during a video conference with his London office, Karim's colleagues were surprised by his changed demeanor. The usually austere businessman was more relaxed, even smiling occasionally. When Sarah knocked on his study door to ask about lunch preferences, he didn't hesitate to introduce her to his bewildered board members. "My mother," he said simply, feeling a surge of pride at being able to speak those words aloud. The surprise on his colleagues' faces was quickly replaced by warm congratulations, though he knew the gossip mills would be working overtime. That evening, as the 3 of them sat in the garden pavilion enjoying the cooling air, Amira brought out a leather-bound album Karim had never seen before. "I've been going through old photographs," she explained, opening the album to reveal pictures of Karim's childhood. "I thought, perhaps we could fill in the gaps together." Sarah leaned forward eagerly, her fingers tracing the images of the son she'd missed growing up. "You were such a serious child," she observed, studying a school photograph. "He gets that from Hassan," Amira said, then caught herself glancing anxiously at Sarah. But Sarah just nodded. Yes, his father was the same way, always so intense, so focused. Though he did have a wonderful laugh when something finally broke through that serious facade. "Like Karim," both women said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise before breaking into laughter. Karim watched them, these 2 women who had shaped his life in such different ways. Amira, who had raised him with love despite the weight of her secrets, and Sarah, who had carried him in her heart through decades of separation. The past couldn't be changed, but perhaps it could be understood, accepted, and even appreciated for leading them to this moment. "Tell me about my first steps," Sarah requested softly, turning another page in the album. Amira's eyes lit up. Oh, he was so determined, refused any help, wanted to do it all on his own, fell down countless times but never cried, just got right back up and tried again. "Some things never change," Sarah smiled, glancing at her son. As the evening wore on, they continued through the album with Amira sharing stories and Sarah asking questions. Each photograph became a bridge between what was lost and what was found, between the family they had been and the family they were becoming. When the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Karim realized something profound. The trust issues that had dominated his life were slowly beginning to heal. Here, in this garden with these two extraordinary women, he was learning that sometimes the greatest act of strength was allowing oneself to be vulnerable. As summer deepened, the Al-Rahman estate underwent a subtle but significant transformation. The formal gardens that had once been a showcase of wealth and precision were softening into something more personal and inviting. Under Sarah's guidance, wildflowers now grew alongside the manicured roses, and comfortable benches appeared in quiet corners. The changes weren't limited to the gardens. The mansion staff noticed how their employer had evolved from a distant figure into someone more approachable. Even James, the security chief, had to adapt to the new reality of a home, where cameras were no longer the primary means of monitoring what mattered. One particularly warm afternoon, Karim returned early from the office to find an unusual scene in the main living room. Sarah and Amira sat surrounded by boxes of old letters, photographs and mementos, while a professional videographer set up equipment. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie. "We're recording our stories," Sarah explained, patting the seat beside her. "For the future. There's so much history here, so many pieces that need to be preserved." Amira nodded, holding up a stack of letters. "Hassan's letters to your mother, his letters to our family explaining his love for her, even the angry responses from our father. It's all part of your heritage, Habibi." Karim sat down, picking up one of the yellowed envelopes. "You kept everything. I couldn't bear to destroy them," Amira admitted. "Even when I was participating in separating you both, something in me knew that someday the truth would need to be told." The videographer, a young woman who introduced herself as Rebecca, began setting up the final lights. "Whenever you're ready," she said quietly. What followed was an extraordinary session of storytelling. Sarah began with her memories of meeting Hassan in London, her voice growing stronger as she described their courtship. Amira added her perspective of that time, filling in details about her brother's letters home and the family's reaction. "I remember the day Hassan told our father about you," Amira said, addressing Sarah. "He was so full of hope, so certain that love would conquer all obstacles. He didn't understand then how deeply rooted some prejudices could be. But look at us now," Sarah replied softly. "Here we are, 40 years later, finally telling our story together." As the afternoon progressed, they moved chronologically through the events that had shaped their lives. The pain of separation was still evident in their voices, but it was tempered now by understanding and forgiveness. "I want to show you something," Karim said suddenly, leaving the room briefly. He returned with a small box that Sarah recognized from his study. Inside was every article, every photograph, every piece of information he had managed to gather about his mother over the years. "You searched for me?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Every few years when the need to know became too strong to ignore," he admitted. "But I never got close enough. The investigators I hired always hit dead ends. Because they were looking for someone who had died," Amira added quietly. "The story we created was too perfect." Rebecca captured it all. The tears, the laughter, the moments of revelation and reconciliation. When she finally turned off her equipment hours later, she had recorded not just a family history, but a testament to the power of truth and forgiveness. That evening, as they sat in the garden enjoying their casual dinner, Karim noticed how naturally they had fallen into certain patterns. Sarah always knew exactly how he liked his tea, while Amira could anticipate his moods with uncanny accuracy. Together, they formed a complete picture of maternal love, one that had nurtured him from afar, the other that had raised him up close. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, setting down her glass. "Perhaps it's time to have a proper family gathering, to celebrate not what we lost, but what we found." "A party?" Amira's eyes lit up. "Oh yes. We could invite some close friends, make it an intimate affair, and announce our family's reunion properly," Karim added, surprising himself with his enthusiasm. The idea of publicly acknowledging Sarah as his mother no longer filled him with uncertainty. As they planned the gathering, Karim watched the two women who had shaped his life working together, their former tensions dissolved in the warmth of shared purpose. The garden around them, once his sanctuary of solitude, had become a symbol of their healing family. Wild and cultivated elements growing together in perfect harmony. The security cameras that had once monitored every corner of the estate now seemed like relics of a past life. In their place, genuine trust and open communication had taken root, growing stronger with each passing day. The preparations for the family celebration transformed the Al Rahman estate into a hive of activity. Sarah's vision for the garden party combined English garden party elegance with Middle Eastern hospitality, creating something uniquely their own. The date was set for a perfect Saturday evening in late summer, when the roses would be in full bloom and the weather would be ideal for outdoor entertaining. "Are you certain about this?" Karim asked Sarah one morning as they reviewed the guest list together. "It will change everything once we make this public." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "I've spent 40 years in the shadows of your life. I'm ready for the light." The guest list itself had been a delicate matter. Amira had carefully selected family members who had either been too young to be involved in the original reception or who had shown growth and acceptance over the years. Close friends and business associates who had known Karim long enough to understand the significance of this revelation were also included. As the day approached, the gardens underwent a final transformation. Thousands of tiny lights were strung through the trees, creating a magical canopy overhead. Tables were arranged throughout the garden, each decorated with centerpieces that Sarah had designed herself, combinations of English roses and Middle Eastern jasmine that symbolized the bridging of their two worlds. The morning of the celebration, Karim found Sarah in her beloved rose garden, adjusting flowers with trembling hands. "Everything looks perfect," he assured her. "I keep thinking about your father," she replied softly. "How much he would have loved to see this day, to see his family whole again." "He's here," Karim said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "In every rose you've planted, in every story we've shared, in the way you and Amira have found peace with each other. He's here." As evening approached, Sarah retreated to her rooms to prepare. She had chosen an elegant dress in deep blue, simple yet sophisticated. When she emerged, both Karim and Amira waited for her at the foot of the stairs. "You look beautiful," Amira said warmly, adjusting Sarah's necklace, a gift she'd given her just days before, an olive branch crafted in gold and diamonds. The first guests began arriving at sunset. The garden glowed with warmth and welcome, the soft lighting creating an atmosphere of intimacy despite the scale of the celebration. Gentle music floated through the air, mixing with the sound of fountains and conversation. Karim had arranged for the announcement to be made early in the evening. Standing on the terrace steps, with Sarah and Amira flanking him, he faced his assembled guests. The murmur of conversation died away as he began to speak. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air. "Many of you have known me for years, have watched me build walls around myself, have perhaps wondered why I kept everyone at arm's length. Tonight I want to share with you the miracle that has brought those walls down." He turned to Sarah, taking her hand. 40 years ago, circumstances and misunderstandings separated a mother from her child. Tonight we celebrate not just a reunion, but a reminder that it's never too late for truth, never too late for healing, never too late for love. The silence that followed his words was profound. Then, as understanding dawned, the garden erupted in applause and exclamations of joy. Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers, while Amira stood nearby, proudly explaining to anyone who would listen how she had helped orchestrate the reunion. As the evening progressed, Karim watched his mother move through the crowd with natural grace. She shared stories with his business partners about his childhood quirks that only a mother would know, traded gardening tips with his neighbors, and charmed his most skeptical relatives with her genuine warmth and dignity. The celebration continued well into the night, but what Karim would remember most was a quiet moment he witnessed between Sarah and Amira. In a secluded corner of the garden, he saw them embrace, tears streaming down both their faces. No words were needed. 40 years of pain and separation were being washed away in that simple gesture of acceptance and love. Later, as the party wound down and the last guests departed, the three of them sat together in the illuminated garden. The air was sweet with the scent of roses and jasmine, and the stars seemed to shine with particular brightness. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, looking at her son, "for accepting me, for opening your heart, for giving us this chance to be a family." Karim reached for both women's hands. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't locked away in safes. They're growing right here in our garden. The weeks following the celebration brought a new rhythm to life at the Al-Rahman estate. The public announcement of Sarah's identity had caused a brief stir in Beverly Hills social circles, but the genuine warmth and dignity with which the family handled the situation quickly transformed potential scandal into a touching story of reconciliation. One morning, Karim came downstairs to find Sarah and Amira poring over architectural plans spread across the kitchen island. "What's all this?" he asked, accepting a cup of coffee from the chef. "We've been thinking," Sarah began, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "The garden has become such a symbol of our family's healing. Perhaps we could share that healing with others." Amira nodded enthusiastically. "We want to create a community garden program. Use part of the grounds to teach gardening to local children, especially those from difficult backgrounds." The idea caught Karim by surprise, and as he studied the plans, he found himself nodding. The western portion of the estate, which had always been underutilized, could easily be transformed into an educational garden space. "It would be a way to take our private miracle and pay it forward," Sarah explained, "to show others that growth and healing are always possible." Looking at these two women who had journeyed from adversaries to partners, Karim felt a surge of pride. "I think it's perfect," he said, "but on one condition: we name it after father, the Hassan Al-Rahman Memorial Garden." Both women's eyes filled with tears at the suggestion. It was the first time Karim had openly suggested honoring his father's memory in such a public way. The project gave them a shared purpose, something to build together. Sarah's expertise in gardening, Amira's connections in the community, and Karim's business acumen combined to create something truly special. As autumn approached, the new garden began taking shape, with raised beds for vegetables, a butterfly garden, and even a small greenhouse for year-round education programs. One evening, as they walked through the partially completed community garden, Karim noticed Sarah looking particularly thoughtful. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "I was just thinking about that first day I came here as a gardener," she replied. "How nervous I was, how many times I almost lost my courage and ran away. And now look at us. I'm glad you stayed," he said softly. "Even when I was testing you with open safes and security cameras," Sarah laughed. "You know, I used to dream about finding you, about all the things I would say, but reality turned out to be so much better than any dream. Because this messy, complicated, beautiful reality is real." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the rose garden, where their truth had first come to light. Amira was already there, arranging cushions on the new benches they had installed. "I've been meaning to ask," Karim said, helping Amira with the cushions. "How did you know it was time? After all these years, what made you decide to bring us together?" Amira sat down, patting the spaces beside her for Sarah and Karim to join her. "I watched you both suffering for so long, Sarah searching, you building walls. When I heard she was working in Beverly Hills, it felt like fate giving us one last chance to make things right. And now here we are," Sarah said, looking around at the garden that had become their sanctuary. Three people who were broken by the past, growing something new together. As the sun set over Beverly Hills, casting long shadows through the garden, Karim reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The cameras that had once monitored every corner of the estate had been removed, replaced by something far more valuable: trust. The walls he had built around his heart had crumbled, making room for a kind of love he had never allowed himself to imagine. The garden continued to grow and change, much like their relationship. Some plants thrived, while others needed extra care, but together they learned to nurture each bloom, to celebrate each new growth, to weather each storm. It was a living metaphor for their family, complex, beautiful, and constantly evolving. In the fading light, mother and son sat with the woman who had bridged their years of separation, their conversation flowing easily from past to present to future. The pain of their separation would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined them. Instead, it had become the soil from which something far more beautiful had grown, a garden of second chances, a home full of love, and a family that had finally bloomed in full. The Hassan Al-Rahman Memorial Garden opened its doors to the community on a crisp autumn morning. Children from local schools filled the paths, their excitement echoing through the carefully designed spaces. Sarah moved among them, showing young hands how to plant seeds and tend to seedlings, while Amira organized groups and managed the volunteer schedule with her characteristic efficiency. Karim watched from his study window, struck by how natural it all seemed. The estate that had once been his fortress of solitude now buzzed with life and purpose. The security cameras that had once monitored every movement had been replaced by the laughter of children learning about growth and nurture. "Mr. Al-Rahman?" A small voice drew his attention. A young girl, no more than 7, stood in his study doorway, clutching a potted plant. "Ms. Sarah said I should show you my first project." Karim knelt down to examine the small herb plant, its leaves still damp from careful watering. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. "You must have taken very good care of it." "Miss Sarah says gardens are like families," the girl said seriously. "They need love and patience to grow strong." The wisdom in those simple words caught Karim off guard. He glanced through the window at his mother, who was now demonstrating proper pruning techniques to a group of enthusiastic teenagers. She looked up, catching his eye, and smiled warmly. Later that afternoon, during a quiet moment between student groups, Sarah found Karim in his study, still watching the activity below. "You've been quiet today," she observed, settling into the chair across from him. "I've been thinking about Father," he admitted, "about what he would think of all this." Sarah's eyes softened. "He would be proud, not just of the garden, but of the man you've become. Hassan always believed that true wealth wasn't about money. It was about what you built with it, how you used it to make the world a little better." "I wish I had known him better," Karim said softly. "You're more like him than you know," Sarah replied, reaching across the desk to take his hand. "His determination, his integrity, his capacity for forgiveness, I see all of that in you." Their conversation was interrupted by Amira, who burst into the study with her characteristic energy. "The first harvest from the community plots is ready. The children want to have a celebratory dinner. They're asking if we can host it here in the main garden." The idea of dozens of children and their families filling his carefully maintained gardens would have horrified the old Karim. Now he found himself nodding enthusiastically. "Of course. Let's make it a proper celebration." The next few days were filled with preparations. The gardens were strung with lights once again, but this time the atmosphere was less formal, more joyful. Tables were arranged throughout the space, each one decorated with centerpieces made by the children from their own garden harvests. As Karim helped set up tables, he overheard 2 of the program's teenage participants talking. "Did you know Mr. Al-Rahman used to be super strict and scary?" one whispered. "No way," the other replied. "He's like the nicest person ever. Did you see how he helped Miguel fix his irrigation system last week?" The conversation made Karim smile, remembering how he used to pride himself on being intimidating and unapproachable. The walls he had built around himself hadn't just kept others out, they had kept him trapped inside. The evening of the harvest celebration arrived, bringing with it a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. Families filled the gardens, sharing dishes made with vegetables from their plots. Children proudly showed off their growing spaces to parents and siblings. The air was filled with multiple languages, laughter, and the kind of genuine joy that no amount of money could buy. Sarah had arranged for each child to present their garden achievements, and Karim found himself moved to tears more than once, as young voices explained how working in the garden had changed their lives. One boy spoke about how gardening had helped him cope with his parents' divorce. A teenage girl described how growing things had given her purpose during a difficult year. "This is Father's true legacy," Karim said quietly to Sarah and Amira as they watched the presentations. "Not the wealth he left me, but this, bringing people together, helping them grow." As the evening wound down, one of the program's youngest participants approached their table, holding a carefully potted rose bush. "We all worked on this together," she announced proudly. "It's a new variety. We want to call it the Al-Rahman Rose, because it's about second chances and family and love." The 3 adults exchanged glances, each fighting back tears. The rose, a beautiful blend of English and Middle Eastern varieties, was a perfect symbol of their journey. Different elements coming together to create something entirely new and beautiful. Under the stars, surrounded by the community they had helped build, Karim realized that his life had come full circle. The garden that had once been a test of trust had become a testament to the power of love and forgiveness. 1 year after Sarah first entered the Al-Rahman estate as a gardener, family gathered in their private garden for a quiet celebration of their own. The space had evolved just as they had, still elegant but softer now, with wild roses climbing alongside the carefully tended breeds, creating a perfect balance of structure and freedom. "I have something to show you both," Karim announced, leading Sarah and Amira to a newly completed section of the garden. There, on a simple but beautiful stone pedestal, stood a bronze plaque, the Al-Rahman family garden, where love grows stronger than time, where truth blooms through adversity, where family roots run deep, dedicated to Hassan al-Rahman and the two extraordinary women who taught his son the true meaning of love. Sarah traced the words with trembling fingers, while Amira wiped tears from her eyes. The three of them stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I've been thinking," Karim said finally, "about that first day when I watched you through the security cameras, convinced you must have ulterior motives." Sarah laughed softly. "And I was so nervous, trying to find the courage to be near you even if you never knew who I really was. I knew something was special about you," Amira added. "The way you looked at him, the care you took with everything. I think that's why I finally found the strength to help bring the truth to light." The evening air was filled with the scent of blooming jasmine as they made their way to the pavilion. The space had been transformed into a cozy family room with comfortable seating and photo albums spread out on the tables. New pictures now filled these albums, images of their reunion, the garden's transformation, the community programs, and countless small moments of their growing family bond. "Look at this one," Sarah said, pointing to a recent photograph. In it, Karim was teaching a group of children from the community program about financial responsibility, using garden economics as his example. His usual business formality had been replaced by genuine enthusiasm, as he explained how investing in good soil was like investing in a solid foundation. "You've changed so much," Amira observed, looking at her nephew with pride. "We all have," Karim replied, taking both women's hands in his. "A year ago I thought I had everything money could buy. Now I know I had nothing that really mattered." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And now? Now I have everything," he said simply. "A mother who never stopped loving me, even when we were apart. Another mother who raised me with all the love she could give. A family that's grown to include every child who comes to learn in our garden. A home that's finally filled with life, instead of just possessions." The Al-Rahman rose, which had been planted in a place of honor near the pavilion, caught the last rays of the setting sun. Its unique blooms, a perfect blend of two distinct heritage varieties, seemed to glow in the golden light. "You know what I love most about gardens," Sarah said, looking out over the space they had created together. "They're never really finished. They keep growing, changing, surprising you with new blooms just when you think you've seen everything they have to offer. Like families," Amira added wisely. "Like our family," Karim corrected, smiling at the two women who had taught him the true meaning of wealth. As darkness fell, the garden's lights came on automatically, creating a magical atmosphere. The security cameras that had once monitored every corner were long gone, replaced by trust, love, and understanding. The walls that had imprisoned Karim in his solitude had crumbled, allowing space for a garden of relationships to grow. The Hassan al-Rahman Memorial Garden continued to flourish, touching more lives than they could have imagined. But here, in their private family space, three people who had been separated by circumstance sat together, sharing stories, laughter, and the deep peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. The garden that had once been a test of trust had become a testament to love's ability to bloom even in the most unlikely places. And in the end, that was the greatest wealth of all. Not the gold in the safe, but the love in their hearts growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing day. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah, Karim, and Amira remained in their garden sanctuary, three hearts beating as one, their family finally forever in bloom.